CUCS is, a long history of doing support services and supportive housing, and have, many thousands of units where we do services, but we are a relatively new developer. And the first project that we developed opened a couple of years ago, Leninger Residences in the Bronx, and it was a straight SHLP, traditional 9% SHLP project. When we started doing the pre-development work on the Arthur Avenue residence, we expected to finance it the same way that we had financed the Leninger Residences, and that's the way we thought about it. And actually, I didn't have any role on the financing side. I did the property acquisition, I did the bricks and mortar, I worked with the architect, I did the site issues, and our CFO did the financing side. And early on in the pre-development phase, our CFO left to take another great job at NYU, and all of a sudden I had to learn about how to do financing of supportive housing, which was quite the challenge. It's a 108 unit, 83,000 square foot building in the Bronx, on Arthur Avenue, just north of East Tremont Avenue, just south of Little Italy. It's a mixed singles and families project, and one of the reasons why we got into doing our own development is that we had an interest in developing supportive housing for families, and in particular families headed by a mentally ill head of household. And so this is a straight 60-40 building, but the 60% of the units, special needs units on the family side, are for families with a mentally ill head of household. As I said, our original plan was a straight 9% tax credit SHLP subsidy project. It became clear early on that we were going to have to do something a little bit different, and we were introduced to the idea of doing a bond financed program. The thing that I want to communicate to everybody in this room who hasn't done this before is that it presents challenges that a traditionally funded SHLP model doesn't present. And the biggest challenge is that you carry hard debt. You have a mortgage, you have something that you are responsible for paying off over the course of your financing, and that is something that at CUCS was something that was hard to wrap your head around for our executive management staff and for our board of directors. So I had to go to them essentially and explain why we were doing a project that from their perspective was no different than what we had done at Leninger, and yet I was coming to them with a completely different financing mechanism, a number of different sources that were not part of Leninger, and why it was necessary to go do that, and why it made sense for CUCS to take on this risk. So the first challenge was actually getting a deal together that we could bring to HPD. The property that we're developing was 5 privately owned lots, all small, single individual owners. It was included an acquisition of adjacent development rights, air rights from adjacent properties. So it was pretty complicated just to get everybody to come to the table and agree on do this deal and come up with an acquisition price that made sense, that was within the guidelines, and get to the point where we could execute a purchase contract. In order to do that, and in order to do any of the deals that we've done and are working on, it was necessary for us to have a really strong development team. And our team includes our architect, Cindy Harden from Harden Van Arnhem, Amy Larrabee is our development consultant, and Herschel Singer, Oliver Chase are our attorneys. And I can't underscore enough how important it is that you have a very strong development team working with you on these kinds of projects. Whether it's these individuals or there are many other qualified individuals, having experts to help guide you in the process was absolutely essential for CUCS. Then I said the biggest challenge was getting an approval internally, and it took many, many discussions, offline discussions, discussions at board meetings, discussions with committees of the board before we got the approval to proceed, because they had to be satisfied that it made sense for CUCS to take on what turned out to be $3.2 million in debt on this project. That, as I said, was something completely novel for us, and being novel, being a novel entity in the supportive housing development world to begin with, that was a big challenge. But we were fortunate to be able to present a financial model that made sense and that they were able to accept and support and give us the approval to. Then we had to proceed to getting everybody else on board and in place, all the other funders that were on that previous slide. And the challenges we faced there were, unlike my experience with Leninger, the amount of scrutiny that goes into this kind of deal from all the parties that are involved in the project goes up by 500%. Everybody looks at everything under a microscope. They want to be absolutely assured that you're going to be able to make this project work. And at one point, we faced a challenge because HDC, who was the entity that issued the bonds, my understanding behind the scenes is that they were considering not going forward with the project because they had some questions about our ability to put all of the other capital financing in place. We did not have all of our services dollars in place to support the project. And it was only with the intervention of, I think, Jessica at HPD that they kept HDC in the game. And the thing to know is HDC has lots of options for these bonds. There's a limited amount of bonds each year. They got lots of calls on those bonds. They get to pick and choose. So, the risk to us losing this deal was very genuine, and thanks to the intervention of HPD and our good relationship with HPD, we were able to keep it going forward. Closing the deal, getting to construction closing was the next challenge. As I indicated, none of these things line up really neatly when you're putting together a deal that has multiple financing sources. They all work off of their own timetable, their own time frame. And in fact, we had one financing source on the capital side that we were not going to get a response to in time for the scheduled construction closing. And so we had to essentially re-engineer the building, value engineer a significant amount of capital dollars out of the project, represent that, and get sign off by all of our partners on that modified version. In addition to that, we didn't have all of our services funding lined up at the time that we were going to close. And so we had to come up with a bare bones services plan and convince everybody that we would be able to operate the program effectively, efficiently, economically, and handle the debt burden before we were able to go to closing. So those challenges, as I said, this was new territory for us, and I guess new territory for everybody in this supportive housing world. But we were very fortunate in being able to close the deal in December. We're actually in construction right now, and we're actually in a position to restore all those items we were forced to take out because we were able to bring in some additional capital dollars post-closing, and we were able to bring in the service dollars that we were waiting on post-closing. Where do we go from here? I think it's the same place everybody in this room goes from there. You've got to evaluate your prospects, both in terms of what makes sense for you as an organization, what makes sense for the community that you're looking to site a project in. And one thing that I make reference to earlier is that one of the reasons we were able to go forward on this project is that we had a good relationship with the local community board. And it's been our priority to establish strong working relationships with community boards and try to do projects that not only fit our objectives, but also meet some of the objectives of the local community. And we were able to do that on this project and continue to look for projects where we're able to do that. It's also important to know your limitations and to not take on things that you really can't take on. We're evaluating 3 different projects right now, and I would say there's a good chance that one of them, the one that I'm most excited about, frankly, the one that I think would yield the nicest, most compelling building is one that we may have to pull the plug on because we're just not able to make all the numbers work. And at some point, you got to take your emotional response to doing a development out of the picture and just evaluate it on its facts and on its merits. And if you can't do it, you need to be able to walk away from a deal. You also need to consider partners. We haven't done a partnership before, but 2 of the projects that we're looking on right now would involve working with partners. They can be really valuable assets. They can help share the risk. They can bring some capital to the table. They can bring some expertise that you don't particularly have. Certainly Alan has a lot more expertise on this than I do. They can also bring some relationships and resources to the table that you might not otherwise have available to you. So for us, it's always about what makes the most sense for the deal. We're not Ego isn't involved. It's not that it has to be our project. It's the project that makes the best sense, the configuration that makes the best sense, the partners that make the best sense. And then I guess the last thing is you got to remain flexible, as we've heard from Jessica and others throughout the day, and as we've been hearing over the last couple of months. This is a changing environment. 5 years ago, if somebody had said MRT housing, nobody in this room would have known what they're talking about. And yet, there it is. It's one of the biggest players in our environment right now. It is a changing environment. The city's going to look to finance these in new and creative ways so they can get more bang for the buck. The state is going to do the same thing. So we have to be flexible and not be set on doing things the way that we did them in the past. And we learned that lesson very quickly on Arthur Avenue, and it was a lesson, well delivered. Thank you.